Caught on Bodycam. Fake cops caught red-handed by the real police. Halle Sinclair's manicured fingers tightened around her steering wheel as blue and red lights flashed in her rearview mirror. 10 hours of back-to-back meetings had left her drained, and now this. The clock on her Mercedes dashboard read 11:42 p.m., a vulnerable hour on this stretch of isolated road connecting her company's headquarters to the expressway. As CEO of Sinclair Tech Solutions, she knew better than to stop in such a remote location, but the authoritative flash of police lights left little choice. Before I go on, I would really appreciate it if you give this video a like, click the subscribe button down below. It would really encourage me to create more videos for you. Thank you so much. Alright, let's continue. The cruiser behind her looked legitimate enough at first glance. Two men emerged, their uniforms catching the moonlight as they approached with flashlights aimed at her windows. Something felt off. The taller officer's badge gleamed too brightly for standard issue, and his partner's uniform seemed ill-fitted, the collar askew. Halle's pulse quickened as she recalled the security briefing from that morning about a crime ring impersonating officers to target executives. License and registration, the taller one demanded, his flashlight beam deliberately blinding her. No introduction, no reason for the stop. The second officer circled to the passenger side, his hand resting conspicuously on his holster. When Halle asked why she'd been pulled over, the response came with unwarranted aggression. "Just comply, ma'am," his emphasis on the last word dripping with condescension. As she reached for her glove compartment, Halle discreetly pressed the crown of her watch 3 times, activating Sentinel, her company's prototype emergency response system. The smartwatch vibrated once in confirmation, now recording everything and silently alerting actual authorities. Sinclair Tech had developed the system after a string of executive robberies, never imagining she'd be testing it herself. "Step out of the vehicle," ordered the second officer, his accent slipping as anxiety edged into his voice. When Halle requested to see his badge number, his partner yanked her door open. "Looks like we've got an uncooperative one. Check the trunk for valuables," he called over his shoulder, dropping all pretense of legitimate police procedure. The fake officers didn't notice the nearly invisible dashboard camera capturing their every move, nor did they recognize the woman they'd targeted as the developer of the city's newest security infrastructure. Halle stepped out slowly, calculating her options. Her company's emergency protocol would need approximately 3 minutes to triangulate her location and dispatch real police. "The watch, the rings, that designer bag, all of it," demanded the taller impersonator, no longer bothering to maintain the charade. "And your phone password." His partner was already rummaging through her trunk, whistling at the expensive tech equipment she'd been transporting home for testing. Halle complied mechanically, playing for time as she surrendered her decoy phone and costume jewelry kept specifically for such scenarios. Her actual phone remained hidden in a secret compartment built into her driver's seat, actively transmitting her GPS coordinates. "My company will just replace everything," she said calmly, noticing the flash of greed in the man's eyes at the mention of her corporate position. What happened next unfolded like a precisely choreographed dance. Multiple sets of headlights suddenly flooded the area from both directions. Authentic police sirens wailed as 3 cruisers boxed in the scene. The genuine officers emerged with weapons drawn, shouting commands that echoed through the night. The impersonators froze, caught literally red-handed and blue-lighted. "Police! Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them!" The authority in these voices was unmistakable, a stark contrast to the hollow intimidation of the imposters. The taller fake officer made a desperate move toward his waistband, but stopped when spotlights from a police helicopter suddenly illuminated the scene from above. In the chaos of arrests and Miranda rights, Halle stood remarkably composed, already giving her preliminary statement to a detective. Her company's technology had worked flawlessly. The emergency alert, the GPS tracking, the recorded evidence. What these criminals hadn't realized in targeting Halle Sinclair was that they'd chosen the worst possible victim, a woman who had built her empire on anticipating threats and designing solutions that were always one step ahead of those who meant to do harm. 12 hours earlier, Halle had stood at the head of Sinclair Tech's obsidian conference table, her reflection fragmented across its polished surface as she addressed her security team. 3 executives targeted in the last month alone, she said, sliding crime scene photos across the table. All pulled over by convincing police impersonators, all robbed of devices potentially containing sensitive corporate data. The morning sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows caught on her signature emerald earrings, The same ones that concealed backup recording technology she'd begun wearing after the first incident. Detective Rivera, a veteran officer with 30 years on the force, clicked through a presentation showing counterfeit badges and modified civilian vehicles transformed into convincing police cruisers. These aren't amateurs, he warned. They research their targets, know their routes, and strike when victims are most vulnerable, usually late at night, always on isolated roads. His weathered face turned toward Halle. And as the CEO of a major security firm, Ms. Sinclair, you fit their victim profile perfectly. The prototype of Sentinel sat in the center of the table, deceptively simple in appearance, just a sleek smartwatch and companion app. Halle's chief engineer, Zoe, demonstrated how 3 quick presses to the crown would activate emergency protocols, recording audio and video, alerting authorities, and transmitting GPS coordinates. We've integrated verification systems that can detect authentic police badges through their RFID signatures, Zoe explained. Anything that doesn't match the database triggers an immediate alert. What Halle hadn't shared with the room was the personal connection that inspired Sentinel's development. Her younger sister had been assaulted by a man impersonating an undercover officer 3 years ago. The case had fallen apart due to lack of evidence, transforming Halle from a corporate tech innovator into a woman with a mission. Every feature in Sentinel was born from that night's failures. After the meeting dispersed, Detective Rivera lingered, his coffee cooling untouched between calloused hands. There's something else, he said once they were alone. We have reason to believe someone's feeding information to these criminals, routes, schedules, valuable targets. His eyes met hers with practiced neutrality. Someone who knows your industry, possibly from the inside. Back in her office, Halle pulled up personnel files, focusing on recent departures. One name glowed on her screen like a warning. Marcus Vega, former head of physical security, terminated 8 months ago after she discovered he was selling access credentials to competitors. His termination had been ugly, threats made, restraining orders filed. She'd almost forgotten about him, but now uneasiness settled in her stomach like a stone. Security footage from the parking garage showed a nondescript sedan following her Range Rover 3 evenings in the past week. The same vehicle had been parked across from her favorite lunch spot, its windows tinted beyond legal limits. Halle authorized additional security measures for all executives, but insisted on testing Sentinel herself tonight, a decision her security team had vehemently opposed. At her private laboratory adjacent to her office, Halle verified the final modifications to her vehicle. Hidden cameras in the front and rear dashboards, a GPS tracker embedded under the chassis, and a panic button connected directly to police dispatch. Everything functioned perfectly in simulations. The system was ready, she just hadn't expected to need it quite so soon. What Marcus Vega and his accomplices couldn't have known was that Halle had been 3 moves ahead from the beginning. The board meeting that kept her late was strategic, a calculated risk to draw out the threat under controlled circumstances. The valuable prototype in her trunk was actually a decoy containing tracking devices. Even her route home had been deliberately chosen for its proximity to 3 police substations. As night fell and Halle prepared to leave, Detective Rivera's parting words echoed in her mind. These criminals aren't just after material goods, Miss Sinclair. They want information, leverage. Be careful what you carry with you. She hadn't fully appreciated his warning then, but as her car rolled toward the isolated stretch of road where blue and red lights would soon flash behind her, Halle realized that tonight's encounter had always been inevitable. A confrontation months in the making, with stakes far higher than stolen watches or corporate secrets. Detective Rivera's office was a chaotic archive of the case, evidence boards plastered with photos of fake officers, timelines of robberies, and now, high-definition images of Marcus Vega and his accomplices captured by Halle's devices. The footage was damning, crystal-clear visuals of counterfeit badges, unauthorized weapons, and faces uncovered by the overconfidence that comes with false authority. As Rivera studied the images, he couldn't help but admire the quality of Sinclair Tech's surveillance system. Your equipment just closed 6 unsolved cases, he told Halle, who sat across from him, still wearing the clothes from the night before. They weren't just after my valuables, Halle said, sliding a damaged flash drive across the desk. This was in the taller one's pocket. I recognized it when they were cuffed and processed. It's a specialized data extraction tool, military grade. Her voice remained steady despite her exhaustion. They wanted what's in here. She tapped her temple. Access codes, security protocols, client information that could compromise national infrastructure projects. The interrogation rooms down the hall held 3 suspects who hadn't expected their night to end in custody. The first 2 were career criminals, hired muscle with extensive records. But it was the third man who interested investigators most, Dale Kruger, former military intelligence, discharged under suspicious circumstances. Rivera's background check had revealed a connection. Kruger had worked briefly as a contractor for a private security firm owned by none other than Marcus Vega. "Vega's not among those we arrested," Rivera noted, pinning the man's photo at the center of the board. But Kruger's phone contains text messages coordinating last night's operation. Vega was monitoring remotely, probably nearby. He clicked through surveillance footage from traffic cameras, stopping on a black SUV parked within sight of the ambush location. The resolution was too low to identify the driver, but the vehicle's custom license plate frame, advertising a high-end gun range, was a signature of Vega's well-known obsession with firearms. The forensic technician entered with preliminary findings from the fake police cruiser. The vehicle was reported stolen from a police auction lot 3 months ago, then modified extensively, she explained, handing over photographs showing hidden compartments filled with fake IDs, stolen credit cards, and most disturbing, a folder containing photographs and schedules for 4 other tech executives. They had plans for more hits this week. Halle's phone buzzed with alerts from her company's security team. Similar devices had been discovered attempting to breach Sinclair tech servers overnight, a coordinated attack timed to coincide with what would have been her abduction. This was never just about robbery, she realized aloud. It was industrial espionage disguised as a crime wave. The pieces were falling into place now. Vega hadn't just wanted revenge, he was selling access to corporate secrets. As if summoned by her realization, Rivera's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was from the Federal Task Force on Cybercrimes. "They found Vega," Rivera announced after a brief conversation. "He's holed up at a lake house registered to an alias. Agents are preparing to move in." He gathered his jacket and badge. "They've requested your remote assistance to bypass his security systems before they breach." Working from a secure laptop in Rivera's office, Halle recognized Vega's security setup immediately. It was a modified version of a system she'd designed years ago. "He's using our old architecture against us," she muttered, fingers flying across the keyboard. "But he doesn't know about the backdoor we built after his termination." With a few precise commands, she disabled the property's surveillance cameras and electronic locks, giving federal agents their opening. The raid was swift and decisive. Live bodycam footage streamed to Rivera's computer showed Vega's stunned face as agents stormed his hideout. On his computers, they discovered the true scale of his operation. Detailed files on dozens of executives, corporate security blueprints, and offshore accounts showing payments from foreign competitors. What had begun as personal revenge had evolved into something far more lucrative and dangerous. As the evidence mounted in the hours that followed, Halle found herself standing before a wall of surveillance photos in Rivera's office. Images of herself leaving her office, dining at restaurants, arriving home. Some dated back months. "He's been planning this for a long time," Rivera said, his voice gentle but firm. "And he's not done talking. He keeps asking to speak with you directly." She met his gaze, feeling the weight of what would come next. A confrontation not on the darkened roadside where Vega had expected to trap her, but in the harsh fluorescent light of justice. For months after the night of her ambush, Halle Sinclair sat perfectly composed in the witness box, her charcoal suit a stark contrast to the warm wood paneling of the courtroom. Across the room, Marcus Vega and his 3 accomplices sat at the defense table, their prison jumpsuits exchanged for ill-fitting suits that couldn't disguise what they were, predators caught in a trap of their own making. Vega met her gaze with a smirk that suggested he still held cards she couldn't see. "Ms. Sinclair," began the defense attorney, a man whose designer suit and practiced condescension suggested he was accustomed to winning. "Isn't it convenient that the CEO of a security technology company just happened to have multiple recording devices operating during what you claim was a random police stop?" His tone suggested fabrication, a setup designed for publicity. From the gallery, reporters leaned forward, pens poised over notepads. The prosecution had already presented the dashboard footage, showing the fake officers approaching Halle's vehicle. Now the defense was attempting to undermine its authenticity, suggesting an elaborate hoax orchestrated to promote Sinclair Tech's new security products. "Did you or did you not have advance knowledge that you would be stopped that night?" the attorney pressed, his voice echoing through the hushed courtroom. I was warned of a pattern targeting executives, Halle replied evenly. That's why our company developed the Sentinel system in the first place. Her calm demeanor infuriated Vega. She could see it in the tightening of his jaw, the whitening of his knuckles as he gripped the edge of the table. He had expected her to crumble under pressure, to become defensive or emotional. He still didn't understand who he was dealing with. The defense called their expert witness next, Dr. Lawrence Kwan, a digital forensics specialist with impressive credentials and a history of testimony that conveniently supported whoever was paying his consultation fees. Kwan methodically outlined his analysis of the footage, suggesting selective editing and timestamp inconsistencies. In my professional opinion, he concluded with rehearsed certainty, this video evidence has been manipulated to create a narrative that doesn't reflect reality. The courtroom filled with murmurs as doubt began to seep into the proceedings. The judge called for order, his gavel cracking against wood like a gunshot. Halle noticed how Vega relaxed slightly, satisfaction spreading across his face. This was his moment, the trap he'd been waiting to spring, discredit the evidence, dismantle her credibility, and walk free to pursue his vendetta from the shadows. Redirect, Your Honor, the prosecutor said, rising. She approached Halle with controlled purpose. Ms. Sinclair, the defense suggests you orchestrated this entire incident. Did you have any other recording devices active that night besides the dashboard camera and smartwatch already entered into evidence? The question was precisely what they had prepared for. Yes, Halle answered, her voice carrying clearly through the now silent courtroom. My earrings contain backup recording devices, developed after my sister was assaulted by a police impersonator 3 years ago. She reached up, removing the emerald studs and placing them on the wooden railing before her. This secondary system operates on a different encryption protocol specifically designed to prevent the kind of tampering Dr. Kwan suggests. The prosecutor entered the new evidence, and the courtroom's atmosphere shifted tangibly as technicians prepared to play the audio. Vega's confidence evaporated like morning dew under a sudden sun. The recording began, crystal clear audio capturing not just the roadside confrontation, but a damning conversation recorded hours before the fake traffic stop. Once we have Sinclair, Vega's unmistakable voice said, we use her access to hit their main servers. This isn't just about payback anymore. There are people willing to pay millions for what she knows. The defense team's frantic objections were overruled as the prosecutor established chain of custody for the new evidence. Technical experts confirmed the audio's authenticity within the hour, the metadata showing continuous recording that couldn't have been fabricated. As the final segment played, Vega's explicit instructions to make it look like a routine police stop gone wrong. The jury's expressions hardened in collective judgment. When court adjourned for the day, reporters swarmed the steps outside, cameras flashing as Halle descended toward her waiting car. Above the shouted questions, one reporter's voice cut through. Ms. Sinclair, do you feel vindicated? She paused, the late afternoon sun illuminating her profile as she turned to answer. This isn't about vindication, she replied with quiet dignity. It's about ensuring that those who abuse positions of trust, whether real or impersonated, face consequences. Behind her, through the courthouse windows, she could see Vega being led away in handcuffs, his elaborate scheme dismantled by the very technology he had once helped create and had sought to steal. 6 months after the verdict, Halle stood at a podium in the grand atrium of the newly renovated police headquarters. Sunlight streamed through the glass ceiling, illuminating the crowd gathered below, law enforcement officials, tech industry leaders, and community activists who had come to witness the launch of the Guardian Protocol. The initiative represented everything Halle had worked towards since that night on the darkened road, a comprehensive system to verify legitimate police encounters and protect vulnerable citizens from impersonators. What happened to me was not unique, she began, her voice carrying through the hushed space. But my resources and position gave me advantages others don't have when facing similar situations. On the massive screen behind her, statistics flashed showing the disproportionate impact of police impersonation crimes on marginalized communities. Today that changes. The Guardian Protocol will be available to everyone, regardless of income or status. She didn't mention that Sinclair Tech had allocated $50 million to distribute the technology freely in underserved areas. The press would cover that detail soon enough. The demonstration that followed showed how any civilian could verify an officer's identity through a simple app, how patrol cars now carried enhanced identification beacons, and how all interactions would be recorded and transmitted to secure servers accessible only through court orders. Police representatives nodded approvingly. Genuine officers had nothing to fear from transparency. In the front row, Detective Rivera watched with quiet satisfaction, knowing how many cases would never happen because of what they were witnessing today. Behind the scenes of this public triumph lay the private aftermath of Vega's case. The trial had exposed corruption extending into the higher ranks of both corporate and law enforcement worlds. 3 police administrators had been indicted for selling authentic equipment to Vega's network. 5 corporate executives from competing firms were facing industrial espionage charges. The investigation had pulled threads that unraveled conspiracies spanning 3 states, with Halle's testimony proving crucial in each case. Ms. Sinclair doesn't just develop technology, she builds bridges, announced the police commissioner as he approached the podium. In his hands was a civilian service medal, the department's highest honor for a non-officer. Her work has already prevented dozens of impersonation crimes and helped restore trust between communities and law enforcement. As he pinned the medal to her lapel, photographers captured the moment that would appear on tomorrow's front pages. What the cameras couldn't capture was the weight that had lifted from Halle's shoulders. Her sister, seated in the front row, wiped away tears as she applauded. The woman who had once been attacked by a fake officer now worked as Guardian Protocol's community outreach director, transforming her trauma into purpose just as Halle had done. They had turned a family tragedy into a legacy that would protect thousands. After the ceremony, as guests mingled in the reception area, Halle's phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced down to see the headline she'd been waiting for. Final conspirator in Vega network sentenced. Former federal liaison receives 20 years. The last domino had fallen. The corrupt official who had provided Vega with authentic-looking credentials and inside information had finally faced justice after months of legal maneuvering. "Looks like they got the last one," said Rivera, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. He handed her one, nodding toward her phone. "Congratulations. It's officially over." They clinked glasses quietly, a private celebration amid the public one. "Is it ever really over, Detective?" Halle asked, watching the diverse crowd interacting. Officers chatting with tech specialists, community advocates discussing implementation plans with government officials. Or does it just evolve into something else? She wasn't being pessimistic, she was being realistic. There would always be those who abused power, who sought shortcuts to wealth or revenge. But now there were new safeguards, new alliances formed in the crucible of her experience. As the evening drew to a close, Halle stood alone for a moment on the headquarters balcony, looking out over the city lights. The emerald earrings she wore, redesigned versions of the ones that had captured crucial evidence, caught the glow of the setting sun. She touched one lightly, thinking of how technology could be weapon or shield, depending on whose hands held it. The satisfaction she felt wasn't just about Vega's downfall, or even the successful launch of Guardian Protocol. It was deeper than that, the quiet certainty that sometimes justice doesn't just happen in courtrooms or police stations. Sometimes it happens because one person, targeted and underestimated, refuses to be merely a victim and instead becomes precisely what the world needs. A catalyst for change that ripples outward, touching lives she would never know.